Welcome to A Flash of Beauty, the podcast, an audio experience dedicated to the further exploration of Bigfoot and the people Bigfoot has revealed itself to. What started as a documentary of personal narrative encounter stories and expert testimony has now shifted into a deeper inquiry into the forever changed lives of those that have witnessed firsthand this hidden truth. My name is Tobe Johnson, co-producer of Flash of Beauty Bigfoot Revealed. Join me along with the crew and creators of this doc, director Brett Eichenberger, producer Jill Rimmon-Snyder, and cinematographer Michael Ferry, as we go back into the trees to sit down once again with each guest in search of the truth, no matter how strange. All right, back again with me, Brett Eichenberger, Jill Rimmon-Snyder, and absent again, Mike Ferry. Mike, come on, man. Let's get things going here. No, Mike's always here in spirit. So, you can meet all these people in person. Shake the flesh, as they say, at Phenomicon in Vernal, Utah. I'll go ahead and get that plug out of the way. We have a premiere that's going to happen in Dinosaur Land. I didn't know it was actually lovingly called Dinosaur Land, but Vernal, Utah, 3 hours outside
Flash
of
of Beauty, the shot of the dinosaur.
Yeah, right. Well, tell people what's going on at Phenomicon and how Flash of Beauty is involved.
So, Jill and I have been attending Phenomicon for the past 2 years, and it's been amazing. It's been incredible. We can't endorse it enough. You get, especially if you're a fan of Skinwalker Ranch series, which we think is a great series. You can get up close and personal with those guys. Of course, they're busy, but you can get a photo taken with the cast and crew of Skinwalker Ranch, and not to mention there's anybody who's everybody, or anybody who's anybody in the paranormal realm and world is going to be there, and there will be surprises, I can guarantee that. So we will be premiering the film September 6th. I don't know what time yet, but maybe in the evening.
It's in the evening. It's in the
7 o'clock.
evening. It's like the opening. It's one of the opening events for the film. The film festival really kicks off Phenomicon.
And it'll be on a big screen, which you're not going to want to miss. And I got to say that, watching our films are always, made in a cinematic style to be screened in theaters. And unfortunately, in today's day and age, we don't get a chance to do that as much as we'd like to. But that's the way to watch the movies, and it's a lot of fun to do it that way. So if you can make it, Vernal's not that far away from Denver or Salt Lake City. You can fly into either one of those airports, rent a car, come out. Everybody is friendly. Everybody is sharing. It's well organized. You will have the time of your life. Come out and say hi.
Yeah, and the kickoff of Phenomicon starts on the 6th. I believe it's Wednesday at 1 o'clock. It goes to Saturday, all the way to Saturday evening. So it's a prolonged event with breakout rooms, adventures, hijinks, in-depth discussions of a different paranormal variety. I think there's over 20 speakers coming to this one. Just a glimpse at some of the people showing up, including George Knapp, Dave Schrader of former Darkness Radio, and I think he's had some Travel Channel shows, all the guys from Blind Frog and Skinwalker, Ryan Skinner, who was boots on the ground outside of Skinwalker Ranch, kind of got grandfathered into the team periodically to look into some stuff. Yeah. And us. So come check us out, and we'd be happy to see you there. Now, Jill, tell people what's coming up here in the future as far as projects with you, because we have some news to talk about, some websites to give out, but the guests we're talking to tonight have a radio show that they're doing on a pretty big channel. So go ahead, Jill.
So in no particular order, I'm just coming in hot. I'm just going to put it out there. So we are talking to Ron Morehead and Scott Nelson about their experiences at Sierra Camp. And if you're not familiar with the Sierra Sounds, buckle up. It's the real deal. So they are, in addition to our show, that's going to come out this morning.
Well, technically it would, I guess it would be a morning for some of them, but it'll be coming out. It'll be live tonight on Coast to Coast AM.
Correct. Okay. Can we stop for a second?
Sure. All right, Jill and Brett, we have some announcement here. Our guests today, why don't you talk about them and what's happening as much as you feel comfortable with, because we have a teaser towards the end of this interview, but we can talk about some stuff. Who wants to go first?
Jill does.
I sure do. I always jump at the opportunity to go first. So our guests, Ron Morehead and Scott Nelson, will also be on Coast to Coast AM this evening, and they're going to be talking all about their experiences at the Sierra camp, the Sierra sounds, and as Tobe said, some other stuff coming up. Stick around and listen to all the way to the end of the podcast, and you'll hear a little bit about the next project coming up. And if you don't hear, what?
No, you're fine. I'm just going to mention the fact that it's August 7th. You're listening to this now this morning. It dropped at 6 in the morning. I hope you had a nice black cup of joe. But on August 7th, that evening, you can go back in the archives if you listen to this later. You can also find Ron and Scott on Coast to Coast. And they're also going to make an announcement on this show here as well. So, it's a nice opportunity for them to get out. They're both big names. It wasn't hard to get them on a show like that. They've done Art Bell's show before. They talked to George Norrie. In fact, Ron was having dinner with George Norrie last year, I think, somewhere up in Bellingham, and speaking on the same subject matter as the Sierra Camp. So that's coming up, and maybe we can get Scott Nelson to show up at Phenomicon too, and we can talk him into finishing some projects he's got going on as well. Brett, any final words?
I just think this is a great show, and I am glad that you guys are listening to us right now, and I think you're going to love it.
And hey, Brett, Tobe, do you guys feel like, even though this interview with Ron and Scott, it's longer than our average interview, but don't you feel like we barely scratched the surface? Like there's so much more.
Oh yeah. We just got started. We just got started with those guys. I mean, I'll just
and no one, sometimes just getting started with a Bigfoot story is actually a painful exercise. But when it comes to Brett, and when it comes to Ron and Scott, they're booked solid all year. Ron goes over his itinerary at the end of this episode, and he's speaking like 7 times. And I think Ron might be celebrating his 80th birthday, and he's traveling more than any of us, I think. I don't know. It's certainly myself. So, it's these guys aren't settling down. People want to know more. And you may have the opportunity to know more about Scott and Ron. So stick around for the end of this particular podcast, and certainly tune in tonight. They're on every radio station on Coast to Coast, and take a gander at all the bombs being dropped in the world of Sasquatch and the Sierra Sound and language, crypto language, via Scott Nelson. Okay, well, let's go ahead and start the show. Our guests today, Ron Morehead and Scott Nelson. All right, we're here with Scott Nelson and Ron Morehead. Ron, you almost need no introduction. You're the voice behind the voices. And we'd love to talk to you about the Sierra Sounds, but we can't really do that without Scott Nelson in tow, because he puts the science behind the voices here. Navy Crypotolinguist, Scott Nelson, Ron Morehead, both of you together. Happy to have you on the show. And of course, Brett and Jill. So without further ado, this is going to be an extended format for the audience listening here. We're winding things down for season 1, and we can't really just have a 60-minute show with these two. So how are you guys doing?
Very well. Great. Thank you.
Ron, Scott, let's start with you, Ron. And Scott, you join in as needed here. But Ron, tell people a little bit about how you got up to the mountain in the high Sierras as far as your interest in looking into Sasquatch. Explain to people how this happened in the beginning.
Yeah, I got involved with a group of hunters, which been going up there since 1958, very remote area in the Sierra Nevadas of California. And anyway, they came out with a story in early 1971 about this entity that was up there, some kind of presence that was making noises that they just well, didn't know what to do with. They went out and their little shelter and saw this huge track, and they figured this is not a bear for sure. And of course, the sounds didn't sound like a bear. And anyway, they came out and told the other guys, and I wasn't one of the hunters, but I was one of the guys. I friends with them all. And the other guys thought, well, it has to be a bear or something. So they all went up there and they started experiencing the same thing again. And they didn't come out when they're supposed to, but one of the guys got freaked out the very first night, and he left the next morning, left him a note and said, I'm out of here. And he hiked all the way out and back and came back down the valley and said, what the Johnson brothers told us is true. There's some kind of monster up there. So anyway, he wouldn't go back to check on the guys like the wives wanted because they were a day late. They didn't come out when they were supposed to. And so he said, I'll go back if you go back with me, but I'm not going in that area by myself. So I went back with him, and graciously so. That kind of excited me, really. There's a monster up there. I want to know about it. Nothing can hurt you when you're 29 years old, and that's what I was then. And so we checked in, and the guys were okay, but I got to see tracks and see what they had recorded. I listened to that anyway. They were packing up ready to get out. And you got to get out when you want to get out, because daylight finds you in the dark and you're going to be in trouble. Is that right, Scott? That's right.
Yeah, quite right. Quite right.
So anyway, fortunately, Bill McDowell, my friend, he let me ride his horse out. And otherwise, I'm not sure I'd have made it because my legs felt like rubber. They were so, I thought I was in good shape too. I mean, I was taking all kinds of martial arts and stuff like that. I was not in shape for that 10,000 foot elevation and 8 miles in the wilderness. So that's how I got started. I started going back there as often as anybody go with me, and we all started taking tape recorders and recording their sounds. And it wasn't until the winter of '71 that the snow hit the Sierras that we couldn't get back in. So Warren Johnson wrote a letter to Ivan Sanderson, a cryptozoologist. And Ivan Sanderson thought somebody just pulled his leg. 23-page handwritten letter. I got a copy of that. And then he sent it to Peter Byrne on the West Coast. By the way, Peter's not doing well right now. This is just between us. So anyway, us and the rest of the world is listening to this, I guess. But he's 95, 96, something like that. So getting back to the story, Peter thought, oh, this can't be real. If you see Bigfoot more than once in your life, you got hit by lightning twice, So he sent it down to Al Berry, who was working for a newspaper in California, and said, if you want to check this out, you can. We think it's a hoax. So Al came down and made an appointment to talk to us all, and he did. And we didn't know all this was going on between the three of them until later on when I got to read Al's notes and letters and stuff that was written back and forth. So Al went up there looking for a hoax. And we didn't know that. We thought he just interested like we were. That he was an investigative reporter for a newspaper in Redding, California. And that's kind of how it got started with us. And we started taking Al in, and he started experiencing the same thing, recording it. And he took it seriously. He was always looking for who could be pulling strings up here, who could be doing this way back here in the middle of nowhere and leaving no sign, because he was really looking for signs of something. He found out later he was going through our packs and everything else when we were out walking around. And so we didn't really become friends until sometime after this. And he wrote a book about this, Bigfoot. He co-authored it with Dan Slate in 1976 or 78, I think it was. And it wasn't until 1978 when he got Dr. Carlin. Hang on, I gotta turn this off. Sorry about that. It's Tobe trying to call me, probably about Peter. Anyway, Todd, excuse me, not Todd. That's how it got started. And I just started going up there often and recording and doing all this. And Al Berry was recording too, but he fostered the studies. He knew how important this could be if it was proven out to be not a hoax or something real. And we knew it was real because when you're back there and you get into that area, who can do that? First of all, in order to make sounds like that, you got to have some equipment because they're really powerful. And you're just not going to walk in there and set something up without somebody seeing some tracks or something, because no one else went to where we went. And he ended up finally finding Dr. Curlin at the University of Wyoming to take it on seriously. But he got laughed out of a couple other universities who. Prior to all this, he took it to Ivy Tybel, who would investigate the Watergate tapes, and they took it serious. They thought, well, this is too powerful to be human-made. It was made at the time of recordings, but they didn't want to do a study on it because they charge a lot of money. They suggested we find a university that would take it on, and finally, after he went to Dr. Lieberman and another doctor in Washington State, who also thought he was pulling their leg, they wouldn't take it on. They're in their paradigm, and but anyway, Curlin did a year-long study and showed that they were outside the human range and also inside the human range, that they could make just about any sound that they want to. And it represented an animal over 8 foot tall. So I don't know how, like Dr. Krantz, he passed away now too, but by the way, he lived right there in Swim. He did. And he didn't think our sounds were real, because they got to be from it had to be a primate out there if it's anything less than human. And they don't give any weight to anything else. So anyway, I just started going with it. Al and I teamed up, and I produced a couple CDs and written a couple books now. And fortunately, in 2008, Scott Nelson got a hold of it, and he by accident. And he's a cryptolinguist, 2-time graduate of the Navy School of Language, foreign languages. He was trained to, he could probably tell you this better than me, but he was trained to decipher sounds to see if it's a code or if it's a language. And if it is a language, what's it mean, if anything? Or just, is it a language or not, or is it just a code? So, and if there's any maliciousness in it, I guess is a good way to put it. And he couldn't find any, and he said they are speaking a language by the human definition of language, which means, for something very important, only humans, according to Dr. Lieberman, Brown University, have the vocal mechanism for speech like we're making now. And when he says that kind of puts, in my eyes, when you got 3 professionals like Dr. Curlin, Scott Nelson, and Dr. Lieberman saying these 3 things, it puts them in a category of a human component. And they're either hybrids, or they've been given the attribute through DNA manipulation by an alien of some type, or someone with advanced knowledge. So there.
Scott, explain to the folks how you got involved with this, because Ron said by accident. Tell the folks how you found these sounds.
Well, I like to say right off the I never was a Bigfoot guy. I was teaching languages and philosophy at a military college. And by accident, I was with my son in my classroom. We were Googling for the first time a subject for a report that he had to write. He was 12 years old at the time. Stephen, my son, by the way, who's been up on that mountain with me and Ron 5 times. 5 of our expeditions up there, Stephen was with us. And so we, by mistake, I Googled in Bigfoot sounds, and it took me to the Sierra sounds on the BFRO, Bigfoot Field Research Organization. And immediately I heard something in there that was completely different than anything I'd ever heard. Having spent thousands of hours listening and analyzing the human voice on tape, there was something different about these sounds. And I knew it immediately. And everything changed after that. I can tell you the 3 things that I knew immediately, right? That it was not a human, okay? But it was speaking a language. And the third thing is that I knew that it wasn't faked. And I have many reasons that I could go on and on and on about to verify those three conclusions that I had immediately. And I've never wavered from those three conclusions. Then after a few days of detective work, I found Ron, and finally convinced him that I was not a crackpot. And in 2 days, I had copies of all three of the discs on CD, all three of the tapes on CDs. Essentially, Berry Tape 1, what I now call the Berry Morehead tapes, Berry Tape 1, Berry Tape 2, and the Morehead tape. After that, I spent about 4 months transcribing all of those sounds, getting the sounds on paper. And then I made a trip out to California to meet Al Berry and Ron face to face. And that's what started it all.
Okay, listening to the sounds here throughout the show, we'll play some of these sounds. Not quite yet, but down the road here. The sounds themselves have been coined the term samurai chatter. And was it Matt Moneymaker who came up with that term, Ron?
Yes.
Okay, so
he heard him just before he started the BFRO, and he came up to Washington and heard him when I was living up there. And
it really sticks. I mean, because it does bring to mind an old samurai movie, and you can just picture kind of Japanese type language going back and forth here. So, Scott, did you hear that Asiatic flair to this here?
It has a guttural, diaphragmic staccato, you would say, like you say, an old samurai movie.
Mm-hmm.
To most people, it sounds like that. Now, when I first brought that up, when I first heard it, and I was playing it over and over again, and my son was right there with me. He says, "What are you doing, Dad?" And I said, "There's language in here."
Mm-hmm.
And he says, "No, Dad, no, it sounds like apes fighting or coyotes fighting to me." I said, "No, son, we have to slow it down like Dad used to do in the Navy." And that's why I said, "We got to get a hold of these tapes." That's why I went on my detective work and to try to find, and someone from the BFR was kind enough to tell me who it was that had the tapes.
Right. Let's go back, Ron, to the Sierra Sounds. Brett, Jill, of course, chime in here as questions develop. But when it comes to the Sierra Sounds, this camp, this hunting site, I think you said some 7 to 8 miles off the beaten path, only by horseback, incredibly remote and at times treacherous. We'll talk about the treacherous times because Scott was a part of that. This camp dates back to before the 60s and the 50s. Does it date back even before the 1950s?
Well, I'm not sure. That's when the Johnsons started going up there in 58.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if the camp was there because there's signs of old sheep herders from the area from eons ago. So, I mean, like carving on a tree or something like that, that's really old. And you find rusted cans here and there. Well, rarely, but this one camp where I think sheep herders were there. So I don't know how far goes back, but probably way back. And again, the Johnsons just started going there until 58. And it started becoming a camp then that they visited each year and hunted. Hunting's great up there. I mean, you could get anything you wanted. And they've always got a deer tag, or a couple of them, one for their wife, one for them. They'd go out with a deer. And Bill got involved. My good friend Bill McDowell, he's a contractor, a general contractor, but he was also a taxidermist on the side. So he got involved with them to work on the heads they brought out and things like that. So he got invited up to camp, and he had a horse, and they could also haul the deer out, which is a big deal when you're eight miles back in the wilderness. It's whatever you do, you got to get them out of there. So they would always gut the deer and trim it and quarter it while we're at the camp and bag it, put it in bags and put it on a horse or a mule and take it out that way. So I met Bill. I met Bill and knew them earlier, and I wasn't a hunter, so I didn't really participate in going up there. But when I was asked to, especially when I found out there was some kind of a monster up there, and of course Donald, who got scared off, I wouldn't go back. He's very religious. Like they're all kind of religious guys, but I was too. I mean, Bill and I were board members, founding members of a huge mega church there, and so we knew about the Nephilim mentioned in the Bible. We knew about those things like that, but that's all we knew. We didn't think about Bigfoot. Bigfoot was not on anybody's radar.
Let's go back, Ron. Not everyone knows about the Nephilim. Explain to people the link between that word, the Nephilim, the Bible, and Sasquatch, and the possibilities of there being, commingling.
Yeah. Well, that's a long story too, but it's Nephilim are a giant species that came from what they call the fallen ones, which are angelic or alien beings that came to Earth and started manipulating the genome of females and impregnating them and creating giants. And that was called the Nephilim. And they were actually eating the Earth up. They were eating people. They were really out of control. So that's why supposedly the deluge came, the big flood, and that got rid of supposedly a lot of them. But they didn't. I mean, angels, just like we are, aliens just like us, we all have choices. So again, you find out in later on in Numbers 1333 that they were here again, and they were giants. And in fact, you really look at it, there's several ways they could have made it through the deluge. They could have maybe went underground. There's a lot of signs of towns underground over in Turkey. And I got pictures of that. And it's kind of interesting. I mean, there's thousands of people living underground. So a lot of theory that these things go underground, and that's why you don't see them too so much. But the Nephilim are a cross between an angel and human. And of course, they don't necessarily call them that. If you get into the cuneiform text, which is the oldest text in existence, came into the Sumerian culture in upper Mesopotamia, and it's 3,400 years BC is when it was the first written language they have ever discovered. Otherwise, prior to that, they used hieroglyphs, pictoglyphs, signs to talk to each other in written form. So from that language, just about all the cultures, including our current Bible, have evolved up through that. And with each king, depends on what he wanted, depending on how it was interpreted. And a lot of the nuggets are in there, though, that are real. And they've went through a long time. I'm getting off track here a little bit, but it's interesting stuff to me when you get into that.
Well, so you brought it up, though, Ron, based upon the fact that you're kind of an elder of a typical non-denominational church, and people are steering a conversation, one way as it relates to the possibility of you looking for monsters, and these monsters in Christianity can only be one thing. And again, it steers us back to this UFO conversation where people at the Pentagon were steering, Lou Elizondo certain directions based upon the fact that UFOs could very well be Nephilim. So they were kind of not granted permission. Harry Reid was told this in particular, as far as funding. So it's an interesting thing to bring up because of the fact that, our worldview is kind of shaped by who we associate with, and the things we do after church may have consequences. So were you ever nervous looking for monsters just based upon your relationships and your standing? Because you kind of had a standing. You were a businessman, a well-known businessman in a small community, and here you are looking for monsters. Were you already Indiana Jones to these people looking for monsters?
We didn't talk about that much, Toby. Actually, Al Berry carried the torch, and for years we didn't, because we were all businessmen and respecting the community and all that, so we didn't really talk about it, only to our friends and relatives. And we certainly didn't talk about the what do you want to call it, metaphysical or the woo-woo stuff, or what do you want to call it, that was going on up there. You kind of just put that on the shelf because you don't know where it goes in your head. It just, I mean, you hear something that can't be heard, you see something that can't be seen, and then how do you tell people that's real? You don't. I mean, not without losing credibility. And that's what holds a lot of people back now.
Well, were you now you mentioned the woo early on in this interview here. How long did it take for your initiation to be at the Sierra camp to experience the high strangeness? Was it immediate? Did it warm up over time? And give an example of what you mean by that.
Well, it's always been there. I mean, yeah, lights rolling around, and not flashlights, but I mean orbs or something like that, and sounds that we couldn't find the source of. I mean, metallic sounds from the air. I heard, or from inside the shelter. We was all inside the shelter one time. We heard where our camp was being tore apart, and we thought the cans and the barrels we'd hauled in there on mules and cabled to the trees so the bears wouldn't take them off, and we thought there was just being rambled everywhere. And you look out there later when all the commotion stopped and nothing's changed, nothing's moved, nothing's happened that you can see. Well, what do you do with that? You just put it up on the shelf and forget about it because you can't explain it. So we don't know if we're all being hypnotized or if we all imagine it. No, we did. We're separate people. We didn't do that. Or if you're listening to another dimension.
Ron, what were some of the wilder theories as to what these guys could be, what these monsters, quote unquote monsters, could be?
Well, I believe in aliens, like most all of us do now, and I think they are a remnant or a product of alien intervention into the genome of primates, and they're not all the same. Depends on what alien did what and for what their agenda was. So there are ones that out there that are friendly, probably, and like the ones we were encountered. They weren't trying to eat us or nothing. And there's also some that are malicious, like the ones that they were encountering up in Portlock, Alaska, and other places too. They've kind of encountered some bad ones. But then what makes bad? I mean, it's all who's telling the story. And the government likes to control the narrative of any of these stories. And I'm sure the government knows about these beings. So what are they here for, and what are they doing, and what it all comes about? Because I got into the science of quantum physics because Al Berry, being a master's degree in science, said that whatever you do up here, don't talk about strangeness, and you got to stay with science. But he had classical science in his baggage, so he was into the thing. This stuff don't exist. You can't talk about it. You're never going to get invited anywhere to talk. And we wanted to start telling people about these sounds because what Curlin did was significant, showing he wrote a paper on it, presented the Anthropology of the Unknown in British Columbia in 1978, I think it was.
Yep, 1978.
And yet that still didn't get academia's attention because it represents an animal. And, he's a professor of electrical engineering, high class. He's got high clearances. He's written a bunch of papers, and I did a due diligence on him, and he's just unquestionable. He knows what he's doing, and he showed in his paper. He's done a book too, Man Like Monsters on Trial. If anybody wants to look it up, his writing and his study on this. So when you get to that professor behind it, and you get someone like Scott saying what he says, it's a language, because Professor Curlin's not a language expert. Scott is. You got Dr. Lieberman, who is a cognitive researcher, scientist at Brown University, mostly in howler monkeys, but he says only humans, any animal on this planet, only humans have the vocal mechanism for language. And that's very significant. Yes,
So, gosh, I have so many questions, but I'm still trying to wrap my head around, Scott, how do you even begin to identify and break down the language? Can you give us a Reader's Digest version on how you do this?
Well, and after having transcribed all the tapes, we ended up, we have almost 90 minutes with all of the tapes, and I have 75 pages of transcripts. Right. So after doing that, I authored a paper, which I now call the SPA, or the Sasquatch Phonetic Alphabet, which details my methodology of doing that, of finding the language, and it also gives us the alphabet of it, which I used according to NATO transliteration alphabet. I used the NATO form because that's what I was used to. Okay, I didn't use the International Phonetic Alphabet because that's an alphabet that no one can read other than linguistics experts. Not even language experts like myself can read it. Okay, but linguistics is a completely different animal than language, because that linguistics deals with the science of, how does the tongue and the teeth make this sound, right? And you don't have to speak a single word of a foreign language to study that and to be an expert in that. Okay, so that's a different animal to what I was doing. Anyway, in 2010, I authored the SPA, and then in 2012, I wrote another paper titled "The Characteristics of Human Language Evident in the Berry Morehead Tapes." And in that, again, I used, as Ron referred to, Brown University, because they are really the best at language, defining the meaning of language. So I used their definitions on what were the functions of language, the elements of language, the properties of language. So I have a whole 5-page paper out on that. But just to go with the elements of language, you start with what we call a phoneme. A phoneme is a single sound. Okay, then more than one phoneme becomes a morpheme, which we would call a syllable. Some people would call it a word, but in language and linguistics, you can't use the word because it's notoriously impossible to define a word, because a word to Ron is different than the same word to me. Okay, in other words, we can say the same morpheme or the same syllable, and it can mean something completely different to everyone that speaks it. So we use the term morpheme. So more than one phoneme becomes a morpheme. More than one morpheme becomes an utterance, or what we would lay people would call a sentence. An utterance. More than one utterance becomes a discourse. Okay. More than one discourse becomes a conversation. And then when you have two individuals, like we have on these tapes, going back and forth, they're participating in what we call conversational turns. And there is no other there's no other way to understand what these tapes show than to understand them as language, pure and simple.
Okay, I think we'd probably be doing a disservice here for the theme of the Sierra Sounds if we didn't play some of these darn old sounds. So we're going to play the first clip here. And Ron, I'm going to have you listen to the unaltered version of this and go ahead and comment afterwards and explain to folks the time and place and setting if you know it here. Let me get this queued up for us. And this one was titled Disagreement. So if everything's set up, I'm going to go ahead and play this sound now. Okay. There's clip number one. Ron, explain the scenery, what was happening that day, if you know, and what you think was going on.
I think that was Al Berry's in 1972, and he had his mic remoted up behind our shelter, about 35, 40 feet on a little pine tree. And something got very close to it, and he tried to see, but he couldn't see. And That's one of the issues up there is we rarely got a glimpse of these things, and he never did get even a glimpse of that night, and should have been able to see something. It sounds like it's holding the microphone. It's so close, and that's the comment we get all the time. How come you didn't get a picture? Well, da 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 da. You just don't get a picture of these things that easy. So that's the story of that. It was night when Al got quite a few good sounds, and I did too, but unfortunately mine burned up in a house fire. And so like I had a really good cassette. It was all cassettes. He had a Sony. I had I think an RCA Portable 3. Took several batteries, D-cell batteries to operate it, but it was stereo. I had these SM58 mics, which I had for my music system, and I sucked those through the shelter's walls. And some of my tapes, you could hear this thing walking around out there, the footsteps crunching with my stereo ears. And so anyway, he got some incredibly good sounds that night. We all did, but
with it being labeled, Ron, sorry to interrupt, with it being labeled here as a sound clip disagreement, of course, that's just them guessing at the time since there was no visual. Scott, are you hearing a disagreement in that language clip?
We would be inferring that only because of the, it sounds like they're excited. And it sounds like their conversational turns are happening rapidly. The problem is that almost all of the Berry tape sounds, when they're participating in the conversational turns, sound very much like that because they, the prosody of the language or the rate of deliverance is so fast. So it's easy to infer that. Okay. And there are other parts, other parts of that same section of tape that that sound very much like that.
Well, let's play them. I want you to chime in here. So what we've done here is we've taken that clip number 1. Let's go ahead and play it again, and then directly after that, we agreed, Scott and I agreed, that 25% is what we're going to slow the rate down here so we can chop it apart and analyze it through Scott's ears and eyes. So let's play the original here. Okay, now let's play the slowed down by 25% version. Okay, it's a very visceral sound. Scott, tell us more.
Well, you can tell when at real time, the first clip that you played, you can tell it does sound the way that Stevie first thought of it, but it sounds like apes fighting. It really does to the layperson's ear, right? But when you slow it down a bit, you can very clearly hear the articulated morphemes and the conversational terms, the utterances that are exchanged in the discourse. This is very clearly a language. And after you hear a certain number of these clips and your ear becomes attuned to them, you don't have to be an expert in language to actually hear that this is a strange, unknown language spoken by creatures that have the ability to go way beyond our ability in human speech.
Now, some people are interested not only in the sounds as you're describing them as being a language, but they go a step further and they analyze where they are and the hertz level. And they see them as being impossible to fake just based upon where they land on their own computer program to analyze this stuff here. So,
Sure.
you know, people like David Ellis, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention him. Also, are you know, they were part of the Olympic Project. Ron, you're a member of the Olympic Project too. The sounds have been analyzed over and over again. Is there anything about the sounds, Scott, that sounds inherently human besides the conversational tone? I.e., do they smuggle in human words? Or is there language from English within?
No, almost. Well, we can't get into. You're talking about cognitive words and expressions. We can't get into that yet because you're asking me two very different questions. You asked me if there's anything human about it. Almost all of it is human, because all of the phonemes that that I extracted from those sounds they're articulated in exactly the same way that humans do. In other words, whatever these creatures are, and I'm not trying to define them, but whatever they are articulating those phonemes exactly the same, with the same apparatus that humans have. The whole tracheal tree, the vocal cavity, the lips, the tongue. There's no doubt about it. Plus, they have quite a few sounds that humans can't do.
Okay, go into detail about that.
Well, they do things. Well, first off, the resonance. Resonance is one thing. Okay, you want evidence for how I know that it's not human? Well, the resonance is a big thing. They're speaking with lungs that are way beyond the capacity of human lungs. Okay. Now, no, I have no scientific evidence for that. I only tell you that from professional experience. Okay. Resonance is the prolonged reverberation of sound. That's what resonance is. Okay. And you have to have huge lungs to be able to do what they do. Okay. The second thing is the prosody. The prosody is the rate of the speed of delivery of the sounds, of the articulations. Okay. That goes way beyond what humans can do. Now, I mean, yeah, I've had people say, well, what about, these guys that do, what are they called when they sell a lot of stuff? And
auctioneers.
Auctioneers. Yeah, auctioneers
okay.
can speak very quickly, right? But they have to take a breath. And it took me a long time, and I really only figured it out about 3 or 4 years ago, because the prosody of their deliverance bothered me so much. But about 3 or 4 years ago, I finally came to the conclusion that these creatures are articulating on the pant. Now, what that means is that they are articulating on the exhale like humans do, but they are also articulating on the inhale without stopping. And now it's something that humans can do with great difficulty, but they can't communicate in that way. In other words, I mean, you can say, I heard them speak. You can. It's possible for humans to do it. Now, apes do it all the time, but apes cannot articulate consonants. Apes can articulate all of the vowel sounds. Even I can do that, right? But you can't do consonants or these morpheme streams. But these creatures are doing it with ease. That's that's a big piece of evidence that proves to me that these creatures are not human as we consider modern humans.
Scott, were you ever able to assign any meaning to any of the sounds that you heard?
Not specific meaning. Not specific meaning. No, because And by the way, that was Ron's constant mantra with me when we first got together doing this is, Scott, what were they trying to say to us? Because especially on Ron's tape, where it's quite evident that the creatures are purposely slowing their language down, except when they speak into each other. Even on Ron's tape, when they speak to each other, it goes back to the very fast prosody. Okay, but when I believe they're trying to actually communicate with Ron and Bill up there, it's very obvious they are trying to slow their voice down and speak to these dumb hairless apes that obviously can't understand, how fast we talk.
So I might.
Sorry.
Oh,
Real quick, Jill. One real quick follow-up to that.
Yeah.
Did you ever discover anything by playing the sounds backwards?
I never attempted to play them. No, I've never attempted. That's been asked of me, but why would I do that?
Carlin did that, and he found no evidence they couldn't. Yeah, because that's been the big deal. Everybody, these universities, Dr. Lieberman, Dr. Minifee, or something like that.
First off, when you play the voice, I've played the human voice backwards on tape hundreds of times, in my analysis, when I was in the Navy. And the human voice played backwards doesn't sound anything like the human voice going forward. It simply does not. It sounds completely different. And I've been asked 100 times, well, how do you know this is not humans just some tape of humans speeded up really fast? Well, it doesn't sound anything like the human voice speeded up either. Because the human voice speeded up sounds like, what's his name? Alfred the Chipmunk.
Alvin the Chipmunks,
yeah, the chipmunks. It doesn't sound anything like these creatures.
Well, Curlin studied just that. And
correct.
Established that they weren't played backwards. They were original at the time of recording, and they were not manipulated in any way. So,
yeah,
that's what Al Berry was running into quite a bit. Is somebody think he just monkeying around. Get it? With them.
So, Ron, Scott, I have a question, and I might be getting ahead of myself only because I've been privy to your stories about things that happened at Sierra Camp. But can you comment or go into detail about mimicry and their abilities to mimic words they have heard and whatnot?
I think they can, but that's because they have such an expansive vocal cavity. I think they can mimic anything. In fact, a lot of people report that I've reviewed or talked to say they heard their name being called in the woods, or they heard their dog's name being called and their dog's not around. They hear human voices out there. And
well, I'll tell you that the only time I've heard them live mimic anything was the morning after the first time we tried to get up there, and we got Ron down off the mountain and the horses. This is before we walked out to see that what had happened to the horses, and the sun was not even up yet, and Ron was in bad shape and was not moving at all, and I had sat up in bed, and I heard not 20 feet away, right at the foot of the mountain, I heard very clearly, Scott, just like that, in almost a female voice. And that woke Ron up. And I said, did you hear that, Ron? He said, yeah. He said, is that your daughter? You thought it might have been your daughter coming over, to the horse camp, Rhonda. And I said, no, that's not Rhonda. You said, what, was there any cars? Did you see any car lights? I said, no, Ron, there's nobody out there. And so we thought about that. We talked about it later on when we had time to, after dealing with the horse incident. And I finally came to the conclusion that the day before, when we were up on that hill trying to get up there, and Ron and I lost track of each other 3 times because he had to go back down the hill to try to collect the horses and all our gear and stuff like that, that we were shouting at each other. I'm going, Ron, just to try to find out where each other was. And so he's going, Scott, Ron, Scott. So I realized that all throughout that previous day, before we made it off that mountain, our names were being shouted back and forth many, many times. So I think that whatever that was out there saw me sit up in the tent and was just trying to get my attention. But yes, I heard it mimic a female woman's voice and call out my name.
I'm going to play, I went ahead and reversed the sound here just to do it here. So let's go ahead and get to the bottom of this here. This was clip number 1, the disagreement. And now we're going to play the reverse sound just to play it, because I've never heard it this way.
You mean backwards?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, not much sense there.
That doesn't sound like it's backwards.
Yeah,
that was backwards?
It was. You want me to play it again?
Well, that does sound similar to the way it played forward.
Is that because just the fact that it's so alien nature?
Well, and the prosody and the staccato of it,
Mm-hmm.
I think lends to it being very similar forward and backwards. But it's not at all like the human voice being played backwards. It's still not I guarantee it's not the human voice being played backwards. Now, I could take what you just played and I could try to, transcribe it, and see how different it would be from my transcription going forward. But, what would be the use of that? It would have no value to me at all.
Right. I want to ask about the horse incident, the hypnotizing, the broken ribs. But before I do that, Ron, you've been a part of a great many televised shows, including Polites, Missing 411, The Hunted. Scott, you were there for that documentary as well.
Yep.
Just in short, you guys are at the Sierra camp with David Polites. You guys are sitting around a campfire. It's a great shot. And David Polites turns to you and asks you, I think, maybe one of the most relevant Bigfoot questions to a lifer, someone who's really invested their life into looking at this mystery. And he asks you whether or not any of the weirder stuff that happened to you, Ron, is embarrassing. And if maybe not everybody thinks that's an interesting question, but I think it's a really powerful question because it gets to the bottom of ego and how you talk about this stuff openly. Did you think that was an interesting question yourself, and talk about why you're not embarrassed about it?
Well, I'm not embarrassed because it's a truthful place and truthful thing that happened. And I just, I'm at the age where I don't care what anybody thinks. I just kind of go with no, I'm not embarrassed at all.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't embarrassed back then because whatever it is, it's bigger than any of us. And I don't mean physically, but it's a big deal. You can establish these things. But I don't know we ever will until they all come out and expose themselves, and along with their alien makers, which is probably going to happen in a year or two.
So not even with talking about the lightsaber floating through the woods or the strange sounds. And here you were warned by your friends and companions on the mountain to not talk about the weirder stuff. Were they embarrassed to talk about it?
They didn't. I don't know if they were embarrassed or not. I can't speak for them, but most of them are dead now. But Bill was there with me most of the time. And then when that light went by us, that was Carrie and I. And we both saw this or witnessed it for several seconds. It wasn't going by fast like something like that. It just was floating through the woods. And that was a little bit concerning because you don't know what it's all about. It's some kind of a form of intelligence, I believe. That's what I think orbs are too. It's energy, and it's energy has with a consciousness some type, but it's not in a biological form like we are. You know?
Ron, have you ever had language pinpointed to your brain? Have you got mind speak? Have you got talked to while you're up in the woods or when you got back?
Not that I know of. I'm too analytical. I try to figure out what made me think that. You know, was I thinking about something else, or maybe that's why they were talking to me orally, because I couldn't get through my thick brain.
Right.
I don't know. So whatever they were saying, of course, my daughter Rhonda thinks she knows what they were saying, but she says it's really not difficult. Just listen to it. You know, they're actually saying Ron, Ron, and I don't know. But they've known me. This was in '74 when I was talking to them, and they was talking back, asking me some questions, and I don't know what they were asking me, but I guess I should listen to all that again and just close my mind, try to hear it, you know, instead of.
It's almost a crime not having Rhonda on this call with us because she is so entrenched in the story. She's been up to that camp so many times. I was really unaware, Scott, that your son had been up there a lot as well. But how many times do you reckon Rhonda had been up to the Sierra camp and explain her link to this mystery?
Well, she's my daughter, number one, and that's her link. But she, yeah, she's gone up there a lot. I mean, since she's probably just a young lady above 13, maybe 14, 12, something like that.
And she's seen them.
Yeah, she has seen them. And she's also had other things happen to her up there. She thinks, I think, one of those things are looking at her as a possible mate or something, because the one she got a really good view of it right in our camp, she turned around seeing this thing. And it was slender, but very broad-shouldered, very muscular, but very trim. It didn't look like an older one, which she'd seen an older one also another time. But they seem to hook into her for some reason. Of course, she's a sweetheart anyway. You know, she's my daughter, but she's my other daughter, Ronica, won't even go up there. She never has been up there. I'm not going up there where the monkey men are. She's heard those sounds, and she sleeps with a knife next to her at night too. But I've taken Royce up there, my son. He's claimed to have seen one, but he hasn't had the experience that Rhonda's had. Yeah, she's had a hands touch her at a sleeping bag, and she knew if she opened her eyes, she would die. She's had some. If she can get her to talk about it, you know, she'll talk about it. But
well, let's get into the story here, because it's a doozy. If Brett and Jill, you don't mind here, this takes a few minutes here, but let's set this up. Scott, you went up to the Sierra camp to do long-term research with Ron. It must have taken some planning to pull this off, because you have to do it on horseback, but then you guys had some scientific studies that you wanted to pull off when you eventually got to the Sierra camp. Talk about this misadventure, and let's get into the horseback incident.
He's going to claim he saved my
First
life.
one? I did. Absolutely.
Just because you see me thrown up in the air 20 feet or, well, it used to be 15 feet.
The way I saved his life, when he was laying there virtually unconscious, you know, I thought he was dead. And when I said, Ron, and I'm shaking him. I said, Ron, I'm headed down. I'm going to go get some help. And so I tried to stand up. He grabbed my arm. That's how I knew he was still alive. He grabbed my arm and says, you're not leaving me on this mountain. That's how I brought him back to life, is I told him I was going to leave him up there and go get help.
Well, that was ridiculous. It's too late in the day and you could not get help. I'd been bear bait that night, you know.
Oh, well, yeah, I know. But I didn't know what else I could do.
Well, wait for me. I had to get my breath. I broke a couple of ribs. I couldn't hardly breathe anyway.
You're thrown off the horse. Scott
Yeah.
does his best to convalesce you. Eventually, you get him back down off the mountain, but your ride hasn't come yet. So you guys are at camp with the horses. Is that correct? Is
No,
Ron's there?
no, the horse trailer's down at the bottom where we
Yeah.
pulled out, and we got the horses loaded. Scott had to drive my truck pulling a 26-foot horse trailer, and that was
Oh,
a bit of it. But I had earlier that day, my horse was supposed to be trail ready. I bought him and let Scott have my good horse. Thank you very much.
yeah.
And
Who, by the way, I
So-
believe saved my life
I
by
had sprung,
not throwing me.
I had sprung my wrist when my pack horse. He decided he didn't want to go up any further. He just turned around, and went back down the hill, and I was trying to hold mine, and mine was wanting to do the same thing. Broke the right rein, but I also got dumped then and sprung my wrist. I thought I broke it. It was swelling up and all that. So anyway, I got that back together, and I think this same time. I've had so many different things happen to me up there. Anyway, went up to the switchbacks further, and the horse acted up again and dumped the load of supplies that we had off this ridge. And Scott was already 200-300 yards up ahead of me, and so I didn't have any help, and I had a sprung wrist. So I was down there trying to pick up stuff we was taking. And by the way, I keep thinking about the cantaloupes because I couldn't find them all.
Oh,
And because we had
well, tell them about the cantaloupe you found on the trail. It
coming
had the
back.
giant, it had the giant bite taken out of it.
Well, wait a minute. Let me tell this story.
Well, okay.
Anyway, I found almost everything, but I was still trying to tie this pack back on the horse with one hand. That's hard to do. And but I got it back. About that time, Scott shows up, and I never did find a sleeping bag until the following year. Actually, I ran across it somewhere, but got up there, and what had happened is Scott's horse, he got up to a certain point and wouldn't go any further. That was a good horse too. That was my mare. She'd been up there before. She knew everything, but she just wouldn't go. And I said, Scott, don't stop, because I was just catching up with him with my pack horse and my horse with one rein. And I get up there and got to get her moving, Scott. You got to get her out of there, because if this one stops and starts thinking about what he's doing, he's going to want to go back. Sure enough, he couldn't get it moving. So the pack horse starts to head back down to this rocky area. And I mean, it's a horrible area, and has big boulders and steep, and you got to, anyway, there my horse starts to take off. I hear, oh, I ain't gonna make this. So I just bailed off the horse at that time, let him go. I figured I'll just go down and get him. They can't get by with this because that's a bad deal. So I went back down there, and down just below those heavy rocks is where I caught up with him. He was standing there puckered out, and well, I'm gonna ride back. I was hurting, even then I was hurting. So I started to get back on him, one rein like this, and swung my leg just about to get it over him, and he starts taking off bucking. God,
That's when I saw you go 20 feet in the air and land on the rock.
Yeah, it used to be 15 feet. No. Yeah, well, I didn't land on the rock. I landed between the rocks, big boulders.
It was more like 25 feet in the air.
Yeah, there it goes. Be 30 feet before this story's over. Anyway, I just tell you what, just 2 or 3 feet either way would have killed me. I mean, the boulders were just huge, and I just landed between them. And I wasn't trying to, but I couldn't not. I never could get my other foot in the stirrup, or I could have probably handled him. But anyway, that started it off. Then we finally made it on the back, because we didn't even get halfway up when all this was taking place. Something up there was bothering the horses. I guarantee you. And but going back, we found one of the cantaloupes I couldn't find on the first trip when I was trying to find everything, and it was all eaten up. It was, the inside of it was just gone, and it wasn't like a bird been picking on it or something like that, but something really got that. And we just kept going because we had to get down before dark, and we spent the whole day up there trying to get halfway up this mountain. I got back down, loaded the horses up. Scott had to drive my trailer around to where Rhonda, my daughter, was parked at this campground, and my granddaughter was there with her, and they had set up a tent. And we went around about 10 miles or so, but it's really on the other side of this big mountain where our camp is. So we found them there, and I think those things come down off that mountain And then they mess around, because Rondo saw one down there one time, and there's stories about them messing around that whole area. And I think because people can't go up that way, it's just too steep and too rugged. So anyway, we stayed there that night, and Rhonda and Wendy, my granddaughter, had a tent, and something was messing with them that night, and they got up. They were so frightened, and I kept the fire going in the fire pit. Next morning, they find this big log they've been drug over behind the their tent, a log for the fire, we think. And they also, Rhonda saw one. That's when she got in there and said, "Get up, Dad, you got to get up." So I got up, hurt me, but I got up. And that's the night also you had those issues happening with you, I think, Scott, wasn't it? Where
Yep.
they had a hand came in on you.
Yep.
And just weird stuff. That's just one little weird story. There's so many of them.
Well, Scott, explain what happened.
Well, it was, I don't know what, it was deep in the night. Everyone had gone to bed because it had been a really bad couple of days. And I was woken up and I could see the glow of the remaining part of the fire on the side of the tent. And we were in a small tent, me and Ron were. So the tent was, I was pretty close to the, you know, the taper of the tent there. And I saw this very huge silhouette of a hand, a giant hand, slowly come and touch the edge of the tent, which immediately I became frozen in fear. I became paralyzed. And I'd never had that happen to me before. And it slowly pushed the tent, the edge of that tent down onto my chest. And I couldn't move, but I was able to articulate some speech. And I remember I spoke in Russian. And I said, in Russian, I said, "Speak to me, speak to me, speak to me." And I said that several times. Говорите с мне, говорите с мне, говорите с мне. But I couldn't, I could barely whisper it. It didn't sound like I just did. Говорите с мне, because I had no wind. I'm frightened thinking about it now. And then after a few moments, when I stopped saying that, then suddenly there was a very loud pop sound in my head. And suddenly I had, and if you want to call this mind speak, I don't know, but it's the only time I ever experienced anything like that. I felt suddenly after the pop, the very loud pop, and there was also a very bright flash of light that accompanied the pop sound. I heard pop. And then suddenly I felt this very strong feeling of well-being. And it kind of said, everything is okay. Everything's okay. Go to sleep. And I went immediately to sleep.
And next morning, the horse is upside down, all four legs up too.
Oh boy! Well, that was the morning before.
That was a Kodak moment.
That was that morning. Yeah. No, It wasn't the next morning. It was the morning before Rhonda and Wendy got there, came over.
Right.
That was the same morning that I heard that my name called. It was right after I heard my name called that I went out. Ron said, "Go check on the horses."
Was there any video or photo evidence captured on that part of the trip? Nothing?
No.
Did you have recording equipment with you?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Well, you don't think about that stuff. You're
right.
involved in the moment of what's going on. You just don't.
Right.
Because I actually took a picture of the horse upside down. That was ridiculous. I've never had a horse like that to do something like that and not be dead. All four legs sticking straight up, and it's still tethered to the line I had, and the other horse is tethered over here, and this horse over here, which was tethered, is now loose, just standing there looking.
And rammed in between the two trees. Its butt and its neck rammed between two trees that the thing was in. That's why I thought it was. In fact, when I got out of the tent and I walked out there and I saw those 4 feet up there like that, Ron was still in his bunk because he couldn't move. He said, go check on the horses. I looked out there and saw Mo, the horse that I thought saved my life, with his legs up. And I goes, Ron, Mo's dead. And that's what got Ron up and stumbled out there. And that's when we realized that one horse had been unclipped from the tether.
Strange question here for you, Ron. You might know this. Rabbits and horses are close relatives. Not a lot of people know that. You can take a rabbit and flip it on its back and rub its belly and put it into a trance, and it does the exact same thing. Legs out, freezes, solid. Do you know if horses have that same ability?
I don't know. I've never saw that happen. Good question, though. They won't lay down for you that easy.
Just out of curiosity, maybe a listener out there knows if that's something that you can do with a horse. I know you can do it with alligators and other animals too. You kind of put them in that. Literally, like rabbit owners will do it to their pet rabbits. They literally call it a trance.
I'm the same way. I'm not.
May I
too.
say
I can
something?
lay on my back and somebody rub my belly, and I'm just.
Hey, by the way, Toby, my iPad's about ready to lose its charge.
Okay.
So
do you have a plug-in?
I have a plug-in, but then I have to take my earbuds out.
Oh.
Okay.
Let's see here. Let me pause the episode. All right, we just had to charge some batteries here, so Scott's voice is going to sound just as good, just a little bit farther away because he's charging his little iPad here. So, Ron, you were about to say something?
Yeah, I was. I forgot what it was now.
Oh, you were talking about the trancing paralyzation thing. With the horses?
I know what. Yeah, no, that was not what I was thinking.
He's in a trance right now.
It'll come back up.
Yeah.
Somebody rubbed Ron's belly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know there's elements to this story we don't have time to get into, but we do have some things to talk about towards the end of the show. So it's not like this is going to be on the cutting room floor as far as stories are concerned. There's the elements of what happened to your daughter, Rhonda. She ended up having a visual. There were other strange sounds, I believe, that happened in the woods that night and things that occurred. But, when it comes to these sounds, we need to play more of them here. So let's play some more sounds here for the folks. We're going to play clip 2. And let's see here. This clip, I have it marked as Samurai. Ron, I don't know if you gave it to me as Samurai clip 2, but that's what I'm calling it. So let's play clip 2. Let me start over with that. Okay, Ron, go ahead.
Scott?
Oh, well, I can tell you that I recognized even some of the morphemes where the female, obviously a female, she goes, Avananu, wa nagibash. Very clear articulation of morphemes, a very clear utterance of language. Again, Vananu, wa nagibash. This is not mimicry. It's not gibberish. It is articulated language. And you just played that at real time, Toby?
Yeah, so that was the unaltered one.
You really get to again, after your ear gets acclimated to it, even lay persons can hear that this is a language.
All right, clearly. Ron, any comments, Ron?
Well, we knew when this was happening up there that they were talking to each other and it was some type of a language, but we didn't realize how significant it being a language is until I found out from Brown University, Dr. Lieberman, that only humans are supposed to be able to do that. then also you got Curlin's report saying it's way outside the human range on places. And so, yeah, what I was going to comment on earlier, though, was the way he got frozen. It happened to me a couple times up there at camp, but that's off the subject of this soundbite.
Well, that's okay. Do you want to address that point? What do you mean frozen?
Well, I shouldn't say frozen. That sounds cold, but we weren't cold. Warren Johnson and I were up there by ourselves, and this thing was chattering right outside our shelter there, just probably 20, 30 feet away behind a big tree. We thought, well, if we jump out there, right quick, we'll see it run off. We'll get a good visual. It was a bright night, and 8,400 feet elevation on a clear night. It's you can read a newspaper almost. So we did. We decided once we're going to shoot out there, and then we'll see it run away. Well, we shot out there, but nothing ran away. So we started walking up towards where we thought it was, this big tree. And we got probably 15 feet from that tree, maybe 10. And we both, in our tracks, just got paralyzed. It's like what Scott was describing a while ago. And I relate to that in my book as a force field. Excuse me. It just was very kind of an intimidating feeling. You can't do anything. You can't go forward. And Warren said to me, he said, I don't know about you, but I can't move. I can't go. I said, I can't either. So we decided we'd just head back. As soon as we started going back, we could move. Got inside the shelter and things started mouthing off again. I think it was having fun with us. And I think that's something we ought to bring out is they do play with people. They toy with you. And they think that's why they follow some people along the edge of the forest, that people claim that, and they hear them making sounds over there and follow them out, and they stop and it stops. And they do stuff like that. And we finally realized that after a while up there, they're just messing with us because they think that we think we're smarter than them, and we're not.
Ron, do you know anybody who's been traumatized by their experiences to the point where it's really screwed them up?
I do.
Can you talk about that experience? I mean, you've seen and met a lot of people in this field here, but yet you're not taking this to the next level of being traumatized. Talk about the power of, being a witness.
Well, the power of being a witness. I don't know what you mean by that. I lost, I can't really tell you who it is, Toby, but there's been more than one person that's been traumatized by this. And fortunately, Scott wasn't, and I wasn't. We're both still normal, aren't we, Scott?
Somewhat.
Somewhat normal, yeah. No, it's just where you put things in your life. I know who I am as a human being. I know how special the human race is on this place, of this planet. Some alien, and we can call it God if you want to, has made us from a troglodyte in his image. He planted the cognizance DNA in us as humans, gave us all the abilities we have. And I personally think it was the Anunnaki. And that's what it's written about in the cuneiform text. And there's a bunch of them. Some of them stayed here and influenced humanity. And that was where Gilgamesh and those other stories came from, the cuneiform texts. And but I think these things have been messing around here for a long time before we were ever created. Because they made these giants and for work or something, I don't know what, but they gave them the abilities they have. And one of them is language. Some of them, I don't think they're all made the same. And I get carried away with this because I really think that's what's taking place. And I think we're all going to find that out in our lifetime. Well, you guys might. I don't know if I will or not.
Scott, are we looking into something that is, more mysterious than language and being a undocumented, feral human? Are we looking into something alien? What's your opinion on this, or do you care to comment?
I would have to give you an opinion, but there was a time when Ron and I mean, probably the first 5 years that Ron and I were involved, we had an agreement that we were not going to talk about the high strangeness, especially when we went and spoke at conferences and stuff, because there there was just such in the research community, there was such a push against that. Believing that if you started talking about the high strangeness, then it throws all of the people throws everybody off track from simply trying to prove the existence of them. So we didn't do that. But there came a time when Ron and I kind of looked at each other and we decided, Ron, we can't hide this stuff anymore. We have to start telling the truth. And we finally just came to the conclusion that there's way more going on here than any of us can possibly know. Yes, that's
Rhonda, my daughter Rhonda sent me a book. It's called, I don't know, you guys may have heard of it. It's a Bloodline of the Gods, and that's who we are. Bloodline of the Gods by Nick Redfern. You ever heard of that?
Oh yeah, well-published author Nick Redfern.
Well, he's came out with a book called we're from the Bloodline of the Gods, which would be the Anunnaki. I'm just saying. Or a good Anunnaki, let's put it that way, because they're good and bad and everything.
Yeah.
Got off subject. Sorry about that, guys. I'll try to do better when I get on professional something.
You're doing great. There's a lot we want to get into. We need to get into, but we have a limited amount of time here tonight. Brett, Jill, I'm going to hand the mic over to you two. I think it's time we talk about future projects with Ron Morehead and Scott Nelson.
Yep.
Do you want Ron
Mike,
to bring it up, or Brett? Go ahead.
Yeah, if I can get my microphone to work here. So, this is kind of a secret that's coming out, but we have done extensive interviews with Ron and Rhonda already in preparation for a film version of Voices in the Wilderness. And it has been an honor to have started this project, and we have some big things that are planned. We'll make a journey to California coming up this fall in September to continue, and then we've got some big plans beyond that. So we're really excited to get this story out there and hear from some voices that haven't been heard from yet. And I think that's what's important about that is maintaining this history, because this is pivotal in the history of Sasquatch. And so we're just ecstatic, like I said.
Ron, you're on board here with the Flash of Beauty team. I mean, they won't always be probably the Flash of Beauty team. There's other things coming down the pike, but this is a big one. I'm just ecstatic that everyone here is involved with this finally. And boy, Jill, any comments?
Well, I'm just so excited because, like Brett said, we had a chance to do an extensive interview with Ron and Rhonda. I guess it was last fall, and in that time, I think Ron's book, Voices in the Wilderness, my copy has more highlights and notes and underlined passages than any other book I own. As we've been piecing this together. And like Brett said, we have some exciting shoots coming up that we're really excited about. And we're just really excited that we get to share this with everyone and involve people in the journey as we get this made.
Yeah, and I think that, one of the things that I've talked about is Tobe and I have this commonality between this movie, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and really, that's a movie that I fell in love with as a child, actually, because it's a story about an extraordinary thing happening to an ordinary guy. And Ron is anything but ordinary. And any of those guys that went up to that camp are anything but ordinary. But at the same time, these guys were just minding their P's and Q's, going about their lives. And they stumbled upon something really monumental. And so that's what the story's about. The story is about discovery. It's about camaraderie. It's about getting out and going on adventures, as we've just heard from Scott and Ron, the kind of adventures that they've been on, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. So we're going to cover the gamut. It's not just about the sounds; it's about the whole thing. It's kind of like an Indiana Jones of the Bigfoot world. That's the way I see it.
I want to say something here too. I'm just very happy that you guys are doing this. I've seen what you've done, and you're excellent at what you do, and I'm very proud that you're going to be part of it. That this is happening. It should have happened really a long time ago, but it's probably waiting just for you two and your team to get aboard and to make it a fruition. It just needs to happen. It is a big story, and it's a truthful story, and it carries a lot of weight for humanity if they'll just pay attention to it, because it's not just about Bigfoot. It's about what they could be and what they could be here for, and all the other things that are going on with the alien intervention, and we're going to see a lot more of that too in the coming year or two.
Thank you, Ron. Appreciate it. And it's really true. It's for this generation and for future generations. No question.
Jill, if people are interested in helping out with this doc, there's an opportunity for people to kind of join from a crowdsourcing way. Talk about that.
Yeah, so we do have a Indiegogo set up. If you go to Indiegogo and look up Voices in the Wilderness, you can find our crowdfunding page, because we do need help. I mean, this is until I win Powerball. These are labors of love. So, we have a lot of fun rewards and ways to get involved that it gives people access that they normally wouldn't have during the filmmaking process. And just to circle back, this story is also about the truth. And, you can try to spin a story any way you want, but at the end of the day, it's about telling the truth. And it's time that we give an honest take on what Ron's witnessed, what Scott's been witness to, and all the people that have been touched.
Well, it's really true. I mean, Ron, you're a big influence on me. You and a handful of other Bigfooters were really the ones that didn't waste my time. I've told other people along the way, privately, it's just like, man, this was so much cooler than you told me. Why don't you tell me what's really going on? Ron didn't waste my time that way. And he, if you ever get a chance to sit down and have a beer with either one of these men, they're exactly who they are on air. And when this documentary comes out, it's just going to be so well received just based upon who's in it. But when the rest of the public, Joe Q public, finds out who you are for the first time, and here's the evidence that you're backing up, Scott, with your cryptolinguist background, and Ron, with your background, we haven't even talked about what happened in South America and what you've been involved with Brian Forrester down there, or the backup of Marcia K. Moore working alongside you as well, looking into the Paracas people. There's so many layers to this. I don't know how much you're going to be able to maybe it's a two-parter again. I don't know, but it's leading somewhere. Do you guys feel like this? Do you feel like this too, Ron, that this is leading? It's definitely leading you outside of the wood line. It's taking you.
It very well could. There's so many stories that I've got that I've chased this thing down now for over 50 years, and you could do a whole series really of some of the stuff. I wouldn't get boring at all. Trust me, I got some wingdingers. I shouldn't be alive, really. I mean, I think the only reason I am alive is so I can share this experience and get it down, because I've just lived on the edge a lot, and it's okay. I've had an exciting life, and I'm not here even next year. I've had a life that most people would like to have, and I've just been very fortunate, and I think whatever Anunnaki made me. And I shouldn't say that, but if you get in, I just love the cuneiform text, because it's it's got the actual happenings of what really happened and how all that's been taken out of context throughout the ages, different leadership. Anyway, excuse me, Toby, but I'm just glad to be part of this team.
Yeah, no, it's thrilling. You're also not just sitting on your backside. You've got things coming up here. In particular, you're coming to my neck of the woods to talk here in Sequim, Washington, and going to be speaking at I believe it's the Seven Cedars Casino sometime in September.
Yes, 26th. Let's see.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is. No, I don't know. Anyway, I go from there to Fort Worth, Texas, just like a round robin, then back here into North Carolina, and then I got to head out to California, and then I got to go to Montana for the David Pilates as we head back up there, and then come back and go into Nashville and speak down there. And there's some guys are going to take me out on an event down there, and other things too. But those are that's going to keep me busy for the next couple of months.
Well, so Montana Con, Scott, you're going to be a part of that. It looks like October 7th and 8th. It is in the heart of the vortex. If you haven't been out to where Joe Hauser's Montana Vortex is, Brett, Jill, I don't know if you've been out there yet. Joe Hauser probably is someone you're going to talk to in regards to this. And I didn't know, Ron, this is how dumb I am. I had no idea how integral Joe Hauser was, in a way, to looking into the Sierra Camp and his Montana Vortex kind of being spurred by everything that happened in the High Sierras. Talk a little bit about the Montana Con, Joe Hauser and David Pilates.
Well, Joe, I've known him for years and years. He was a wildlife biologist and he working for PG&E. He had an encounter up in the which he couldn't figure out because he's very classical but he found this deer paw sticking up out of the deer paw out of the leaves, and he thought a lion or something had killed it, and that's covered up with leaves. But anyway, all the leaves were carried from another area and stuck over the deer, so it wouldn't be seen. He opened it up, and I think he said its innards were taken out. It's still warm, so he stuck up on something that was pretty fast. But that got him involved, and he started looking up Bigfoot, because another event he had out in the woods with his son, and he dug up Al Berry and I and came and talked to us. And he's a very interesting, very intelligent, very informed person. And we took him up there at the suggestion of a scientist, wanted to do a Flora-Flauta study of the area and look around and see if there was any signs at all of any kind of manipulation of speakers or any nails in trees or ditches have been dug for wires or anything like that. So he and I were up there, just him and I, for 3 days, just doing stuff and talking. He's a wildlife survivalist too. I mean, the guy can braid a rope out of weeds and make it strong enough. But I seen him start a fire with a stick too. You'd never try that. But he's a very interesting person. He ended up getting out of the job he had, and he bought the Montana Vortex because he realized this has got some kind of a mystery about it, this whole thing, Bigfoot. So he bought that, and it came along with a physicist, Nick, I think is the name. He wrote a book about quantum physics because the vortex has a anomaly to it that you can actually see with your eyes. And they've got some really interesting stuff up there. So he's part of this Montana Con that's coming up. Him and David. David moved up there from Colorado, David Pilates. And David and I have been friends for a long time too. I met him in an event in the early 2000s somewhere. And I began to trust him because he's very black and white. If you guys know David, he's no joke guy. Everything's black and white. And anyway, he got me to agree to him going up to camp, and I took him and his videographer up there, and that's where the missing one, the hunted, came in. Right. What's important when I mention that in my speeches, I talk about the 15-minute section after me, not me, but the 15-minute section after me, which this woman's seen this pixelization go from one tree to another. And that conforms to my theory too, that they have learned, and according to quantum physics, according to Dr. Paul Dirac. He got the Nobel Prize in 1933 for antimatter, which is direct exchange between energy and matter and energy are interchangeable. It was proven later at the Hadron Collider in Switzerland, and when a piece of matter turned into energy. You can't see energy, but you can sense it, you can detect it. So some of these people who have eyes that are just right can detect energy sources. And anyway, she's seen this energy form move from one tree to the other. At the same time, a bunch of students down at the school were witnessing UFO. So I think there's a UFO component to these things. I'm pretty sure that's what made them. But I'm speaking at that Montana Con. David got hold of me when I was in Florida here a couple months ago.
Jill, one more time with the crowdfunding website. How can people get involved if they love what they've heard and they want to get involved with the documentary, the website again?
At Indiegogo, look up Voices in the Wilderness, and you will find the project. Or you know what? Follow us on Facebook at A Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed. We will have links up and we will be promoting it. And if you can share that with people who want to know the truth and want to hear the stories of what happened at Sierra Camp, that would be fantastic.
Scott, Ron, any future projects here? Ron, I think you're working on a new book. Is it too soon to talk about it?
Well, I've just about got it done, so probably is. I just get into a little bit more of the what I think is truth and how it solves a lot of mystery. And a lot of people used to call me paranormal or the woo-woo or something like that, but I hit it face to face now. Yeah, maybe I am, but actually, quantum science is not the same as pseudoscience. Quantum science is a science, and it answers a lot of the questions that's in the woo. It answers all the questions that the paranormal people have. How things happen. How does a thing disappear? How does that happen? There's a rule that has to govern everything that happens. And what is that rule? Well, you find out, you just do your research like I've been doing, and you find out what that rule is. And so I get into a few more mysteries like that and how it's solved, as far as I'm concerned.
Scott, any projects coming up here that you want to talk about?
Well, my book has been in the works for a long time. I've been asked hundreds of times, when is your book coming out? And but at least now we have a title for it. And Stephen helped me with this title, by the way. It's going to be called Discovering the Language of the Green Man. There's a lot of reasons for that title, and that will be, of course, explained in the preface of the book. The Language of the Green Man.
Very cool.
And of course, Ron will be a very big part of that book.
Mm-hmm. No, that's fascinating, because giving away what the Green Man is kind of not a very big deep dive for most of the listeners here, because it reaches back to the old reliefs that you would see on these Gothic buildings, a depiction of a nature spirit, a nature giant, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep. Very clearly, they existed in Europe for a long, long time.
Yeah. And Brett, you kind of get into this a little bit with some B-roll footage, correct, in part 2?
With the Green Man?
Well, just with the idea that the Sasquatch has been depicted throughout history, and there's proof of it, correct?
Yeah. We've got some I think some explosive, if not controversial stuff in part 2, and some stuff that is really going to. One of our inspirations, of course, for part 2 was the Quantum Bigfoot. Was Ron's book,
right?
And Ron is in part 2, and part 2 is going to get some people talking for sure. There's a teaser out there if the audience hasn't seen it yet. It's on our Facebook page. Check that out. That's just the very tip of the iceberg, you guys.
And it's a shareable link now. You put it on Vimeo. It was attached momentarily just to Facebook for a couple of days now. People can share it through a Vimeo link. Scott, Ron, I think Ron, you're busy, but Scott, I'm going to urge you, if you can, to hop on a plane, go to Dinosaur World, Vernal, Utah. It's coming up on September 7th. And word has it that I may be involved with Phenomicon from an MC point of view. So if you want to hear me ramble on, join Scott and I, have a pint. Blind Frog Ranch is on my bucket list. I don't know if I can get there. We're going to try to make some crazy stuff happen there.
Try.
Yeah. Ron, I'd love to see you out there too.
So, yeah, that's going home for me.
Yeah, you have a dual reason to show up there. So there'll be some other surprises associated with Flash of Beauty and some other projects coming our way here in the future. So Phenomicon is what we're talking about. We only have a couple more interviews to go before season 1 of Flash of Beauty, the podcast, is done with it, and we'll come back with part 2. But Ron, Scott, I appreciate your time tonight, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you, Toby.
Thank you, guys.
A lot of fun.
This has been a Resonance Production podcast. If you have questions, comments, or suggestions, you can email us at bigfootrevealedpod@gmail.com. Also, if you're just discovering the Flash of Beauty universe, you can watch our documentary on most major streaming platforms.